So happy New Year to all of you. In name of the faculty of the Institute for Interdisciplinary Studies, I welcome you to this exciting experience, this meeting on artificial intelligence and explanation and the evolutionary explanation of religion. This meeting continues the discussion we have already had in previous years on the origins of humanity. It started in 2014 in Netherhall House with this meeting. How did it all start? With the presence of Richard Darwin, a famous computational biologist in Cambridge. Last year, we had Mark Thomas from University College London in Netherhall House too, to speak about our fractured African origins. And last year too, we started discussing the issue of artificial intelligence with Elias Kahn and Selma Köke. We continue this year focusing on these questions that you have read in the program. These are big challenges which are emerging in the context of the attempts to explain religion by evolutionary means. And these challenges have been popularized and widespread by the books of Yuval Harari. Actually, these challenges can be very briefly summarized in the following sense. In the Bible, we have the origin of religions based on covenants between God and humankind in the image of God. And the challenges now emerging, one of the big challenges now emerging is this question: where are these covenants and humankind in the image of God preceded by Homo sapiens sharing primitive animistic forms of religiosity? It is a big unanswered question. The other big question is, will humankind in the image of God, as referred to in the Bible, disappear and become replaced by the new species Homo Deus? Two open questions which cry out for answers. These answers we are searching for, seeking to give answers to these questions. And this is the aim of this meeting. Starting this discussion, we have not yet developed answers to these questions. And the aim of this meeting is to start forming a team, an interdisciplinary team, which tackles these questions. And so you too are invited to reflect about this. Once again, in these meetings, the contributions will not try to give you already answers, but to stimulate you to think about. There will be no time to answer all possible questions which will be exploding in your heads during this meeting. So don't worry, there will be a follow-up in which you are asked to present comments, questions, they are already after this meeting, so that we can prepare well the follow-up. Once again, don't worry if you cannot ask a question in this meeting, because it will not be possible to ask all possible questions, but you can take this question, send it to me, and propose a contribution for the coming meeting about the questions you have. Well, this is all what I wanted to say as introduction. You have read the program. I have here would like to thanks for those who have sponsored this meeting with funding. Ilyas Khan, the CEO of Cambridge Quantum Computing, that you can see here, and Otto Sexer in Zurich too, who is following this meeting, and I am very pleased. So I ask Timothy to begin his presentation, please.
Hello, everyone. Just to make sure that you can hear me.
I can hear you, but then you have to share screen.
Okay, so give me a second. Here we go.
Excellent.
Okay. So a little bit about myself. I'm Timothée Chimbombo. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Civil Engineering, University of Strathclyde. So currently I'm working, the line of my research is working on designing and fabricating smart tunnel segments. So in short, a smart segment is a piece of concrete element in which you put sensors so you can track their position, their physical or mechanical behavior from the manufacturing plant to the final destination. So I'm doing this research as a member of the Civil Automation Group, which is a very multidisciplinary group with engineers and scientists. Currently, we have physicists, civil engineers, electrical engineers, material science engineers, and sometimes we have also collaboration of chemists or chemical engineers sometimes also. So the kind of research we do include the things like using robots to deploy sensors, which is like one of the aspects of the research I'm doing. This is kind of a robotic arm installing sensors. It's just a concept design you can see there. And another kind of research we do is to develop smart materials with capability of self-repairing and sensing some properties we want to measure. And another thing is, for example, to use AI techniques to detect surface cracks on construction components. So that was a little bit about me, just to give you a context. So let's kick off with our presentation, which is about the book Sapiens by Yuval Harari. So how did I come across the book? For the little story, it all started in the British Museum 2 summers ago, I think, when after a visit, I found in a book, in the bookshop after this book, another book, bestseller, History of the World by Gombrich. I couldn't buy it there because it was a bit expensive for the money I had. So I went online to find a cheaper version. So that where, by pure chance, I came across the book Sapiens by Harari. So, well, I read some summaries, watched some YouTube video about the author before I decided to read the book, and here I am today to talk about it. So it seems as a good custom to start by defining concepts before talking about them. So it's about talk about religion and the evolution of religion from the primitive form to, what we know now, or some of what we know now. So, I found two interesting definitions that really match the concept of religion as developed by Yuval Harari. The first one is from Yuval Harari himself. So, religion is a system of human laws that is founded on a belief in superhuman laws. And the second one is by Dunbar, who is according to the last information I received, kind of a master of Yuval Harari, who trained him at Oxford. Religion is a byproduct of basic universal cognitive processes. So those two definitions are purely kind of materialistic. So religion is, according to those two people, social construct, an imaginary thing just came that just came out of the mind of human being. So now, when and how did religion appear? That would interest us in this presentation. To answer this question, let's start with this timeline of the Homo sapiens from the death of our common last mother with the chimps up to now, more or less. In the book Sapiens, Yuval Harari framed the history of Homo sapiens around three major revolutions. The first one is the Connective Revolution. The second one is the Agricultural Revolution. And finally, the Scientific Revolution, which happened just more or less 500 years ago. So the Connective Revolution is probably, according to him, when religion started. It happened somewhere between 700 years, 1700 years ago to 30,000 years ago, which this revolution talk about is characterized by particularly two elements, which are the beginning of a human way of communicating, so the human language, which is different from the animal language. Believe it or not, animal can communicate. They can communicate simple things like, watch out, a lion is coming, or watch out, a human is coming, I can kill you. So, and they act accordingly. But the human way of communicating is different and specific in the fact that human can not only communicate on direct image, but it can also add descriptions. Watch out, a lion is coming, is probably 100 yards from us. Or watch out, human is coming, is dressing like this or like that. It's more specific, and these characteristics allow to form network of people, personal network that could go up to, according to specialists, 150 people. But to form larger group, you need more than that. That's where the second characteristic of the cognitive revolution comes, which is the capability of mentalizing things and create new realities out of them. These two elements put together made possible the apparition of primitive religions of hunter-gatherers. So a typical example is of the Stadel human lioness figurine in Germany. They say it's almost dated around 32,000 years ago. So you can see here on this figurine a human body with a lioness head. That's simply impossible for a chimp to conceive like a thing like that. So they say at that point we could already start talking about a kind of primitive religion. So then came the agricultural revolution and the apparition of what we can call doctrinal religions. According to a general consensus, the agricultural revolution started around 12,000 years ago. From this point, sapiens was the only humanoid existing, and his physical and mental features are not really different from us. So the agricultural revolution saw the formation of first cities. So remember, with the cognitive revolution, human could go from smaller groups to form larger groups because he could have a better way of communicating different from other animals, and also the capability of mentalizing things and create new reality out of them. So during the agricultural revolution, so we saw the birth of first cities, later that became kingdoms, empires, that naturally to keep all those people together, you need tools. Tools, for example, to trade, or you need that where currency, I mean, primitive currency started, and you need laws people need to abide by. Otherwise, you'll have an ungovernable society. And you also need beliefs to live by for large community coming from diverse geographical location and all kind of backgrounds. So during this period, we also saw the birth of major religions, starting by polytheistic religions that flow kind of directly from the animistic religion practiced by hunter-gatherers. And we also saw the birth of religions such as Buddhism, which is more or less a natural law natural law-based religion. We saw also the birth of dualistic religion like Zoroastrianism, and most importantly, the birth of the three important monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And then came later the scientific revolution, which is recent to other ones that happened just 500 years ago. The scientific revolution started in the Christian Europe, where intellectuals, most of them Christians, if not all of them, since the Middle Age, started to grow in the belief that the world shouldn't be feared. The world is not a mystery, the world is intelligible because made by God. This conviction led them to the advent of what is now known as the experimental method, and that later led to the science as we know it, the experimental science, around kind of 1500 AD. So this led to an explosion of human ingenuity like never seen before. So one of the consequences of the scientific revolution is, for example, what come later, the Industrial Revolution. And today we are still living this explosion, the initial explosion of scientific revolution that happened 500 years ago. In addition to all the good the scientific revolution brought, the humanity, the scientific revolution also came with other stuff linked to religion, because we are talking about religion. Remember that the definition of religion I gave before can fit what we know traditionally as religion, but also other kind of stuff. The scientific revolution propelled those other kind of stuff we could include as religion, what I call godless religions, based on either Christian ideas like the supremacy of the individual, or the community, the importance of community, supremacy of individual, which led to kind of humanism based on individualism, or the supremacy of the community, which led to a humanism based on the importance of community, where communism is probably the direct corollary or the most extreme corollary of the later. And we also saw kind of new religions believe based on purely scientific ideas such as the theory of evolution and the fundamental idea of war between species that imply that the stronger will kill the weaker and live longer. So that led, as we know, to the sad advent of Nazism and later gas chamber of millions of Jews, gypsy, and physically impaired killed in concentration camps. For Harari, religions and all its modern declinations are still a social construct that don't objectively exist, despite the fact that its zealous and partisan practice led to incredible wars with millions of deaths in the 20th century only. So, to finish, just to sum up, reminds the key idea for Harari is that religion is a social construct, a byproduct of our social brain, a tool to create and maintain larger personal social networks. Religion evolved with time and brought at each step new declinations: animism, polytheism, monotheism, dualism, natural law religion, or modern secular form of religions. All of them, according to him, they are not very different. They are just a social construct. This approach taken is intellectually pretty sound because it's tried to answer the difficult question of knowing when did religion start. The entire exercise of answering the question is well supported by the latest evidence on evolution biology. But I still have some trouble to fit in a monotheistic religion such as Christianity, which is founded by the very idea of being a religion of incarnation and a personal encounter with Jesus, which is a person whose historical existence is beyond doubt. Also, how could such logical frame explain spectacular conversions, personal conversion obviously, such as St. Paul on his way to Damascus, or more recently, this French journalist, André Frossard, who went from a staunch atheist communist who did want to know nothing about religion except criticizing it, to become one of the biggest modern apologists of the Christian religion. So that was all for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Timothy, for this nice presentation about this idea of religion by Harari. The roots of this idea come from Robin Dunbar, and we will now discuss more in depth this view, starting with the presentation by Alfred Driessen. Please, Alfred.
I would like to speak about an article of Robin Dunbar dealing with religions, the social brain, and the mythical stance. It has been published in the Archive of Psychology of Religion just a year ago. And I'm Alfred Driessen. I'm Professor Emeritus of University of Twente. I'm a physicist, but in the last time I'm working more in the field of philosophy, specifically philosophy of science. Okay, let's go to the article of Robin Dunbar. He tackles a central problem in his article. He was wondering how it is possible to to come to a large community, because already in the Neolithic period we find cities, like for example Egyptians, and with thousands of people and more. And if you look for the animal, then you see even with the apes, you don't get more than 50, 100, 150 animals together, and then it is split. Of course, you have the ants, but I wouldn't say that's a real community, because the ants between each other don't communicate. That's more robot-like community. And now where comes the, his question is, where comes the interaction between the individuals if you come to a larger community? As many of these people, they're looking for material causes. And one of the things was he's thinking, if you do certain things, you produce endorphins in your brains and you feel good. And then if you have an interaction with somebody, you get these endorphins and endorphins, and then you're feeling good, then there will be a bond between you both. And for example, by grooming, you can get this feeling and you can create this endorphin. But the problem is, grooming, individual grooming takes time. That means if you don't have sufficient time to get to communities more than 50 people, so 100 people or what else, but not much more. So you need another form of grooming, collective grooming, what you could call grooming. For example, laughter, singing, dancing, feasting. And then coming in, then Dunbar mentions also storytelling and religion. And the last two already is something special, because, for example, for storytelling, you need language. And you know, language didn't appear up to very recently in evolution. And religion, he thinks that for bonding large communities, you need religion. But let's go further. So now he was looking for the social role of religion. It is a kind of social grooming. What is religion doing? And he distinguishes two types of religion. It's the immersive, early version of religion, and the doctrinal, ritual-based religion. So first one, you can think, for example, dancing, you get this trance, and you get some special state just by rhythmic movements, and perhaps eating or drinking some special things. But anyhow, so it's a quite primitive form. But for the doctrinal, ritual-based religion, you need language. You need to communicate, yes, quite abstract concepts, and that needs further development. And his statement is that even for the large communities of the Neolithic period, about 10,000 years ago, there's religion needed for bonding, not just the immersive religion, but the doctrinal, ritual-based religion, which assumes languages. But then he comes to a discovery that's not all of the thing. There's something additional needed, that this large community will be possible, that religion brings some additional thing. It is a mystical stance. That something happens to the people, and this makes these large religions possible. And it provides a basis for bond of mega communities. Then he's asking himself, when does it happen? And it's clear it didn't happen before the appearance of modern humans around 200,000 years ago. And we are sure that it happened when we are in the Neolithic period, about 10,000 years ago. I could finish, but I would like to show a third slide. A few years ago, I had this presentation, what makes us human? And we presented a figure you see here to the right side, this figure. What's that? It's the time axis starting 4 million years ago up to now, and some certain parameters, functionalities, or how you could call it, recognition, conscious, free will, technology. And you see it rises up very slowly with time. But nearby the present, it rises very rapidly. And that's one of the conclusions that I took is that the rapid rise now is a kind of a singularity. That means that the past cannot explain the present, cannot explain the rapid rise. It is not all about mutations. Mutations take time to get it, but there's no time in recent periods for this rapid rise, that it's due to mutations only. There is revolution instead of evolution. And it is reasonable to assume additional parameters in recent times, which I coined the bright principle. Other people call it its introduction of the spiritual soul, but let's say it more general, a bright principle. And now if you look for the paper of Dunbar, he brings additional element in, that the rise, what happens recently, is not only the parameters I mentioned here, but it's also, for example, the mystical stance. There's something which is coming from outside, that experience the individuals and several individuals, and the experience that it makes that they come together, that they form large communities, that the new thing is coming in. And that it's what I think is interesting for this article of Dunbar, it confirms that something very special happens in the new times. And the new times, starting perhaps 200,000 years ago, or even only at about 20, 30,000 years ago. We don't know exactly, but something new has started. With that, I would like to finish, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Alfred, very much. And for this discussion about Dunbar, now Theo McKeever will a bit more explain which challenges are emerging from this evolutionary explanation of religion. Theo?
Hello. Can you?
Hello.
Okay.
Yes, we see you. Can you share?
Yep.
Excellent.
Is that okay?
Well,
great. Okay. So, hello. Firstly, a bit about me. I'm actually still an undergraduate at the University of Manchester. I study physics and philosophy, and I'm most interested in theoretical particle physics. And I'm a Catholic convert as of 3 years ago. So really, I'm just getting started in the fields of science and religion, but they're both topics which I'm very interested in and passionate about. Saying that, I hope I'm in some sort of position to delve into the challenges raised by Dunbar for biblical religions, which we'll look at for the next 6 or so minutes. So as Antoine said at the beginning, my aim here is to simply raise the challenges and to leave you to discover and construct the solutions yourself. So a bit of recap so far. There is an anthropological approach to explaining the origin of religion, mainly set out by Dunbar. So this is a process that happens over many hundreds of thousands of years, potentially, where we developed new methods for group cohesion, that is to prevent group fracturing, as there are advantages in being part of a larger group. As we see in modern apes, grooming can be used to do this. But as hominids' brain sizes grew, Dunbar proposes that we developed a more efficient method of bonding, immersive religion, which produces the same emotional bonds and endorphin release as grooming. Dunbar then states that doctrinal religions as we see today are built on top of immersive foundations. And through their use of advanced language and better communication, we are able to stably bind even more within a community. So the challenges from Dunbar. These are not explicitly relayed by Dunbar, but emerge as a result of his study. So we use the word challenges, not threats or conflicts here, because this is an opportunity for congruence between science and faith. In fact, the biblical account of religion and that of anthropology are compatible. It fits perfectly within God's character to make use of natural means, which he himself established, in order for us to discover or rediscover him. However, our work is not done. Science now asks religion for a less poetic description of the origin of religion and man, and to align religion's timeline with that of anthropology. We need to combine the physical mechanisms of anthropology with the spiritual truths of religion. So I like this photo here because it shows a new track coming in from the left, or a new train of thought, appearing to cut off the original track and stop it abruptly. But actually the two tracks eventually align. So right now, both anthropology and religion are asking and answering serious questions of each other. They are in the process of convergence, but are not yet obviously aligned. So that's why I put this purple arrow here, because I believe that's sort of where we are at the moment in this messy bit. So this is probably quite obvious, but nevertheless useful to go over what the Bible teaches. So the Bible says that Adam and Eve were the first humans made in the image and likeness of God, i.e. they had spiritual souls with morality and free will. So just like Adam and Eve, the Bible teaches that all alive today are made in the image of God and are all bearers of original sin. So you sort of got these two components here. And also a bit more from anthropology. So Homo sapiens reached the full set of features we see in living people today at the beginning of the Neolithic era, about 12,000 years ago. So Homo sapiens after this time are often referred to as AMH, or anatomically modern humans. And here is a quote from the opening lines of Antoine's paper, Transmission at Generation. Emerging results in evolutionary genetics support the hypothesis that humanity could not have had only two genetic ancestors at any time in the last several 100,000 of years. So therefore, it seems we are not all descended from the same couple of hominids, as perhaps we may have guessed from the story of Eden. So that's an apparent conflict, which raises two challenges. So relating to these two photos here, we have Homer Simpson as having a spiritual soul with the ability to choose good or evil, which I've realized while sitting in this chair, I kind of resemble. And then obviously we have the origin of sin, original sin in the second photo. So these are two main challenges. The first one, if anatomically modern humans coexisted with Adam and Eve, and thus not all of us are directly descended from Adam and Eve, how are we all in the image of God? So if spiritual souls were passed on to us simply through heredity and only from Adam and Eve, then that would mean many alive today do not have spiritual souls, and as so are not made in the image of God and are without moral responsibility. However, this should feel wrong, and the church does teach that all alive today and for many millennia are all God's children made in his image with moral duty. So we are left with the challenge of how to reconcile the fact that we have spiritual souls and are in the image of God with the fact that we are not all direct descendants of Adam and Eve. In a similar way, there is a second challenge about how it can be that we all bear original sin. So again, if other anatomically modern humans coexisted with Adam and Eve, and thus not all of us are directly descended from Adam and Eve, how do we all inherit original sin? So again, we're in need of a mechanism to explain how and why we all unavoidably bear original sin. So as Antoine said in his introduction, my job, thankfully, is to simply put forward these challenges and to leave the creativity and research to you. Saying that, I've included 2 sub-bullets on these, on certain things to look to in providing solutions to these challenges. So actually, the host of this meeting, Antoine, has in fact addressed these challenges, for example, in his 2016 paper, Transmission at Generation. And of course, there are other challenges which arise in combining the 2 fields, but I think these are certainly 2 important ones. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I believe we're going into some question time now, but if it's viable, I'll leave this screen up so you can digest the questions a bit more fully. So thank you.
So thank you very much, Theo, for presenting these challenges. Is there someone who wants to ask some question now?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question to Theo.
Please.
I'm right here. Here's my my biological ancestor, and my question is why?
Excuse me. Tell you who are you so that people know.
Yes, I'm Richard Prince. I research and teach constitutional law, and I live in Amsterdam.
Okay.
And this is Cornelis Prince. So my question is, Theo, why do you think that the standard is the anatomically modern human being? So you seem to locate Adam and Eve at the beginning of the anatomically modern human being. It could have also been, I suppose, at a point before that, maybe the first Homo sapiens, or even maybe Adam and Eve are before that. Maybe Neanderthals also had this spiritual soul. So why do you look at the anatomically modern human being exclusively?
Okay, so I'm sure others might be able to provide a better explanation than this, but I think it's because Adam and Eve is sort of the start of doctrinal religions, and as Dunbar proposes, doctrinal religions came a long while after immersive religions. So that means Adam and Eve would already have been sort of part of this immersive religious culture, and so that sort of the start of doctrinal religions, as we see anthropologically, and already having a decent time of immersive religions, comes around this era of the beginning of the Neolithic, so about 12,000 years ago.
Yes, there is another, I would like to complete this. Dunbar is, the argument by Dunbar is to that doctrinal religions, or we could say covenantal religions, based on God, which emits moral rules, which is the origin of moral rules. Hunter-gatherers have had no such an idea of God. So the God of the Bible is this God, Dunbar says, emerged, this idea of God, Dunbar says, emerged in the Neolithic.
Thank you.
Well,
Sam has
Vuko, yes, please. Vuko.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, perfectly.
So first, let's shortly introduce myself. Vuko Vriljevic from Zagreb. I'm a physicist, active in particle physics, and I think member of the scientific committee of these meetings. So I have one observation and one question, and any of the 3 speakers, if they want, might comment. I see that, so I didn't go to the end of it, but I started reading the paper of Dunbar. So we seem to be explaining religion as a way to build larger communities. Well, I think that the interesting question is, So what's actually the advantage of building larger communities? I mean, you could imagine evolutionary scenario where simply if the condition of living beings present doesn't favor larger communities, well, they will never build. And that's what seems to have happened to the rest of the animal realm and dolphins, lion, and other animal friends, well, are doing pretty well without larger communities. So I wonder whether there is an answer. I mean, whether evolutionary actually, you can explain why larger communities have built at all. So that's one question. And then there is a generic observation on that you seemed, I think that any way of explaining things can be legitimate, but it starts being dangerous when it's exclusive. And let me put an example. Observation of UFOs, so flying saucers. Well, you can go, and I have no opinion about the matter, so you can try to explain away all possible apparitions of UFOs and trying to find explanations that, well, this is, but I think if we want to be scientifically serious, well, we have at least to admit the hypothesis that maybe some flying saucer actually visited us. So, and putting the analogy here, I think there is a priori decision that whatever religion is, its origin is in man. So you seem that methodically excluding the possibility that maybe something from outside actually had an impact to the apparition of religion. And I would say that scientifically, at least until that hypothesis is disproved as wrong, well, you have to admit it as a possible explanation, and that seems to be completely excluded.
So, Buko, thank you very much for this contribution. I think you can start working for the next meeting with developing on this issue. Well, we have to go ahead now, and as you have seen, we have presented here this first challenge that our covenantal religion, based on the narratives of the Bible, seems that we have to accept that emerged about in the Neolithic, and before we have Homo sapiens creatures sharing animistic forms of religiosity, not doctrinal moral religion. How this is a challenge, we have to give an answer. Now we are we start tackling the other challenge, which will be the future of humanity, and this means for believers too, which is the future of humankind in the image of God. So I ask Jean-David Poncy to present.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. You see me well? I don't see me.
Yeah, but sharing.
I am sharing the.
Very well, excellent.
So I present myself shortly. I am doctor in philosophy of sciences, of biology, and okay, I am in the executive committee of the institute. So I will present the last chapter of the second book of Harari. This last chapter is the data religion. So the summary will be what is religion according to Harari. We have spoken a lot already about that. an overall vision of dataism, some remarks to nuance Harari's philosophy, and what are these new challenges. What is religion according to Harari? Foucault summarized very well. For Dunbar and Harari, religion is a way to build a larger community. Of course, it's a very poor conception of religion. Here I have a quotation. Religion is anything that confers superhuman legitimacy on human social structures. It legitimizes human norms and values by arguing that they reflect superhuman laws. So this definition is clearly atheistic. As Foucault said, there is nothing coming from outside. Functional, and for Harari, there is a great difference between religion and spirituality. It's not the same. And we see that in the next quotation of the book Homodeus. Some religions, from Buddhism and Daoism to Nazism, communism, and liberalism, argue that superhuman laws are natural laws and not the creation of this or that God. It's very interesting that liberalism is a religion for Harari. We see that so his conception of religion has little to do with our conception of religion. So, religion is necessary for the functioning of society. I would say religion is above all useful for totalitarian regimes that need superhuman laws. For example, the laws of history for communism, of the laws of the supremacy of racism, of the races for the Nazism. Then, now an overall vision of dataism. People and machines are data managers. We all are data managers. And therefore, people and machines must work together as equals, even if machines are already superior. And then the quotation, Homo sapiens is an obsolete algorithm. After all, what's the advantage of humans over chickens? Only that in humans, information flows in much more complex patterns than in chicken. Well, then, if we could create a data processing system that absorbs even more data than human being, wouldn't that system be superior to a human in exactly the same way that a human is superior to a chicken? So we see it's a very reductionist view of human. Humans are only calculators, and we are useful in the way we can calculate better than computers. So the first consequence is it will be possible to replace most professions because machines will manage data better than any human can do. It's already the case. For example, I was told that in the Baltic countries, lawyers are replaced by machines. When the fine is not very high, in penal law, it's a computer who will condemn you and calculate the amount of the fine, for example. For data management to be optimal, we must ensure that as many objects as possible are connected. Ourselves, but also our fridges, battery hands, migratory birds, trees, etc. Ideally, the whole universe must be connected. I would say that some people, we follow a little bit already this logic. I exist, I am happy according to my influence on the social networks, how many likes I get, and so on. Another quotation. We mustn't leave any part of the universe disconnected from the great web of life. It's interesting, this expression, the great web of life, because in this great web, there's a lot of things which are not living beings. I mean, computers are not living. But for Harari, since everything is algorithm, the computer is as a living being as humans. It's the same. Conversely, the greatest sin is to block the data flow. What is this if not a situation when information doesn't flow? Hence, dataism upholds the freedom of information as the greatest good of all. So, for dataism, there are only 2 commandments, not 10. That's I have to maximize data flow and to connect everything to the system, including heretics who don't want to be connected. We see the danger of a totalitarian regime, forcing everybody to be connected. These 2 commandments are a quotation of Harari. It's not my opinion. Now, some remarks about Harari. Harari is a very smart guy. It's a little ambiguous. He doesn't think that dataism is true. For him, it's only one of the most probable ideologies. He says, it's doubtful whether life can really be reduced to data flows. In particular, at present, we have no idea how or why data flows could produce consciousness and subjective experiences. Maybe we have a good explanation in 20 years, but maybe we'll discover that organisms aren't algorithms after all. Okay, but the fact that he thinks that we could explain humans, only with algorithm shows that he is a materialist. Then for Harari, if we are aware of the danger of the scenario of dataism, we will be able to avoid it. But it does not take a position for or against dataism. Okay, now, what are the new challenges? Clearly, it's a reductive vision of man. We could summarize that saying, man is a machine like any other. We always come back to the same question. What makes life worth living for a man? What makes a man not a machine? But firstly, I would like to present a few classical arguments and then what I have called decisive arguments. Firstly, man created the machine and not the other way around. Even if we cannot control machine anymore, maybe it makes a difference that we are created a machine. Man is capable of God, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, capable of God, not the computer. Capable of God means if you are an atheist, like Harari, Harari is capable of God because he has to take a position for or against God, for the existence of God or not. Is that the meaning of being capable of God? But until now, we don't have computer. A computer is not atheist or believer. We could program a computer to take a position for or against the existence of God, but I don't know if it makes any sense. Then another, I would say, social argument against atheism, it is precisely the large companies like Facebook or I don't know, WhatsApp, YouTube, that manage the data that do not want to share it. They don't want, because information is power. So the commandments that everybody must be connected and share as much as possible information, I mean, it's an illusion. And people, on the other side, protect their privacy. People, not everybody wants to share all his information. Another argument is that Harari confuses reality with the information needed to describe it. For Harari, and it's an interesting point of view, everything is information. Of course, biological life is information in the DNA. Our brain are information, computers are information, but you have things, feelings, which are not information. I mean, if I have pain, if I put a nail in my hand, I have a lot of pain. The pain coming to my brain is an algorithm, is describe it to my brain like a signal. But the pain in itself is not an algorithm, it's something more. And that's very interesting. So you cannot reduce our feelings, pain, fear, anger, and so on, to algorithm. Pain is more than an algorithm, and all our human reality cannot be reduced to algorithms. Then decisive arguments. And a decisive argument against the dataism could be the problem of meaning and happiness. The world described by Harari, which emphasizes the flow of information, is for me meaningless. All this information, for what or for whom? Why to have a web of life if nobody understands for what and for whom we have this web? I mean, when I teach a child something, for example, I know what I am doing so that the child can find meaning in his life, so that he can pass on this knowledge and make others happy. But I don't want to teach him for a fraction of a second in the flow of data. I want to do something to pass on something forever. So our deep aspiration to happiness takes us beyond the world of algorithm, I think. We want something more than to be a connection in the web of life. So as conclusion, I would say that the data philosophy or religion, it's a bit like the Sartrean philosophy. It's a philosophy putting itself on trial. It is descriptive and condemns man to be a useless patient, a useless connection in the web of life. I thank you for your attention. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jan David. I see in the chats the message arriving that the meeting is provoking quite interesting thoughts. So I will give in the discussion the floor to Sam and Fabio and Dan. So please, you can be sure you can speak. Now we will go further with a presentation by a neuroscientist, Tim Daly, because I would say Harari relies very much on the results of present neuroscience. So Tim.
Thank you very much. Yep, can you hear me?
Thank you.
Okay.
Can you share a screen?
Sure. Yep, 1 second. Okay, yep, 1 second.
Yes, no, you have plenty of time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Can you see? Yep.
Yes, perfectly. So you can go.
Okay. Sorry, 1 minute. Okay, so thank you for listening. My name is Timothy Daly. I'm a final year PhD student in the philosophy of neuroscience at the Sorbonne in Paris. And I only have a small amount of time, but I'd just like to ask a few questions about how we might overcome reductionism in the neuroscientific study of religious experience. And there are a couple of ways to do that. So the kind of thing I'll be talking about very briefly is based on I don't know, can you see the whole slide? Everyone can see the whole slide? Okay, great. So it is based on a project of William James, actually, who was one of the founders of modern psychology, and he was interested in the varieties of religious experience, and then he wrote a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience, in which he documented different kinds of religious experience across the world. And a very important conclusion that he came to was the fact that the spiritual value of religious experience is not to be found in its material causes. So just because you can discover the cerebral context in which religious experience takes place tells you nothing of its value to the individual. So he studied in his book religious feeling. And this is very different to studying the activity of neurons. Now, the impoverished view we have of the human being is based on evolutionary thinking, because a fundamental question we ask in philosophy of biology is, what is a species? And Western civilization for centuries until Darwin used Aristotelian ways of thinking about powers, formal causes, material causes, final causes, efficient causes. And Linnaeus, who was the founder of modern taxonomy, he used the Aristotelian concept of powers to build a distinction between animals, plants, and various other forms of life. Now, the problem is, from an evolutionary point of view, if humankind came about gradually, well, from an evolutionary point of view, there is no human nature, because it is not as though there was a creation event, but rather the human being came to be in a gradual process. Thus, there is no specific point of time at which someone becomes human. However, there is an interesting critique to be found in David Oderberg's Real Essentialism book, which provides very interesting critiques of this point of view, because the problem is we, in our daily life, use the concept of a human being as though it were something real and different to the rest of the animal kingdom. And I argue that this is actually the case. But this is actually really because there is a language revolution. We are the product of evolutionary history, but there is something that humans can do that other species simply cannot do. You can train chimpanzees that a specific new little animal, a gub-gub, can make the sound woo and is called a gub-gub. But what happens is that humans are unique in their ability to derive relationships. You don't need to tell a human that woo, that we can work backwards from woo to the animal gub-gub. They will do it on their own, and they will go further in this. They will not only be able to move from woo to the animal gub-gub, they will even be able to make relationships. They will be able to derive relationships between the word gub-gub and the woo and the word woo. So only humans can do this. There is no other animal that has this capability. And while there is an empirical literature showing the vast linguistic capabilities of non-human primates, they have limited linguistic abilities. And this, for me, will always mean that humans can do this that other animals simply cannot do. It's obviously an important question for the future, but really for its past and present, what does it mean to be human? Well, it means to be able to use language that in ways that other animals simply cannot and probably never will be able to do. Now, what is religion? Well, it's the encounter with spirit, fundamentally. This idea that there is something called matter and something called spirit. And there's a really interesting paper by Dunbar behavioral analyst, Stephen Hayes, called Making Sense of Spirituality. And it's interesting, if you look within the Judeo-Christian tradition, this idea that there is a sense of an eternal perspective, I am that I am. So when we look at the term Yahweh, we find this idea of I am. And within the New Testament, we find Jesus Christ making reference to this idea of I am being, I am here, I am perspective. And I study dementia, I study Alzheimer's research. And interestingly, there is a common idea that when you get dementia, well, you're no longer human. There is a dehumanizing process of a dementia diagnosis. Now, interestingly, the human self, what is it? It means I am, I was, and I will be. These are fundamental aspects of human identity, and only humans can affirm that I am, I was, and I will be. This is for linguistic reasons that evolved because of our complex brains, of course, but fundamentally they cannot be reduced to brains. Their value is human. So just for the skeptical neuroscientists out there, even in the most ravaging, destructive processes of cerebral damage and dementia, all is not lost. There is some really convincing research that humans continue to form these relationships, and therefore the value of human experience cannot be reduced to brains. So if I've only had a small amount of time to talk to you, but if I've convinced you to either look at William James's Variety of Religious Experience, Oderberg's critique of evolutionary ways of defining species, and interesting research, empirical research into how humans do still have a sense of self despite having quite damaged brains, then my presentation has not been in vain. Thank you for your attention.
Adwan.
Thank you. So once again, thank you very much, Tim, for highlighting the importance of this idea of personal identity, which is an idea, which is a principle, which is deconstructed by Harari in his book Homo Deus. We come now to the discussion and a break. You can take a break. We can go further with discussing the message I have received by Fabio Massaioli and Sam. They want to say something important to the audience, both, so we can hear what they have to tell us. But if you want, please take relax, coffee, fresh air to start again at 11:55. Yes. Okay, Fabio. would you like to, and Ilias too? So please, Ilias.
I think, in fact, maybe we hear from Fabio. I think he's wanting to say something for a while. I don't mind waiting. I can wait.
Okay, then Fabio Masaioli, are you hearing me?
Yes, hello.
Please. So, excellent.
So no,
You have sent the
thank you.
message.
Yeah, I think I have to think about everything. It's quite complicated. So, but I just wanted to second Buko's remark about communities. I feel all this theory by Dunbar is a bit, you know, I miss now the words, the words in English, but you have. I think it's a bit after the fact. You know, why would human beings desire, in the first place, to build a larger community? I think it's a bit after the fact that we at present have larger societies, and I don't think it's even correct to speak of communities in our case, because societies, as I had written, are based more on transactions, on laws, which in the end are also laws are transactions, and not upon emotional bondings. You have emotional bondings with very few people, even in the context of organized religion. So this was just strengthening, adding to Vuko's point. And also, I think I like much better Yuval Harari's idea of religion, because I think when we speak about Christianity, religion is not a full description of what is going on, and religion is just an aspect. And I think I may even be. I think I could even agree with Harari on this point. So that was just a comment, but I have to think about it all, about everything we said much more before.
Thank you. You are also for the comment for the follow-up meeting. You can think further and then send a presentation. Well,
Okay.
Ilias, please. Ilias.
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, just
Thank
getting
you.
myself back on the video. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Happy
Hello,
New Year.
hello.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, Antoine, this is
Yes.
great that we're not missing a year. You and Alfred and the committee have done a fantastic job.
Yes, it was great. And yes, and you're sponsoring us too. Thank you. Here you have Cambridge.
Yes, very good, very good.
Well, okay.
I was just going to make a quick comment,
Yes.
and I think this has been brought up consistently in all of the. I shouldn't say all, but in a very large majority of the papers, particularly those that are sort of following this William Jamesian sort of initiative for the last century, more than a century. The focus on language and the symbolism of how we communicate. So whether it's some sort of formal language, which might be mathematical, or whether it's a language of emotion, how do we capture emotion, or abstract languages like art and music. So my point was going to be this: when we talk about language, I would just be a little bit cautious, because we are right at the cusp, right at the boundary of meaning-aware language processing by machines. This has never happened in the history of humanity. Machines have always been clumsy. Robots don't look like human beings. They don't understand context. We can't tell jokes to them. And for various technical reasons, nothing to do with with these theories about mind, body, and the distinction between humans. But I think last year or the year before, we had a very good discussion about the Turing test. And all I was going to say was that it's likely that in the very, very, very short term, I mean, when we look at the span of humanity, certainly within a decade, possibly within less than a decade, I think we will have this new construct where machines genuinely have a meaning-aware capacity. So not just individual word recognition, but this conversation could be had with a machine. At that point, I think if we base our appeal on language, and we talk about being created in the image of God, which of course I believe passionately, then it's dangerous to build arguments that are linguistic or language oriented. So this is my only point, something for the future, Antoine.
Yes, absolutely. Your talk of last year is now available in the homepage of the IIS, and I think it is a quite stimulating talk, especially when you discuss your third principle, that to define things, we have not only to look at the thing itself, but to the relation to the other things. You got this principle by Grothendieck. Yes, I think this is really quite an interesting approach. So you are already also committed for the next follow-up meeting. Thank you very much. Sam, you wanted, Sam?
Hey,
Sam?
hello. Yeah, I
Please,
couldn't
hello.
find the raise your hand in the reactions. I can only clap or raise my thumbs.
Okay, but I see. So please.
I was wondering if the evolutionary origins are mutually exclusive to the religious truths. So it seems to me, regardless of the origin of, for example, my belief that 1 + 1 makes 2, it is either true that 1 + 1 makes 2 or not. And if I, let's just say, cannot believe that if I cannot believe my own rationality because it is an evolutionary quote unquote byproduct, then I cannot trust my conclusion that evolution itself has occurred, right? So it seems that the origin is really irrelevant to whether or not religious truths are true.
Well, thank you very much. That is worth thinking, as well as all other comments emerging comments now in the discussion. We go now to the third part of the meeting, starting with the presentation by Nikolai, that will try to draw some conclusions of the Harari's books. Nikolai?
Okay.
Wow, you are in St. Gallen.
Yes, that's my second home. I love it to be here. I would like to invite all of you here. It's amazing. Happy New Year, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, almost done. There we go.
Yes, excellent.
Can you see it?
Yes, yes, perfectly. Go on.
Wonderful. All right, so welcome everyone. It's a great honor for me to speak here. And we already had some amazing talks, and I hope I can also add some value to this. My talk is also dealing with the books of Yuval Harari, especially with a focus on how his implications impact us as an individual, especially our identity, and connected to that, our freedom and humanity. And as a short introduction, this is my research group at the ETH in Zurich. I'm the guy on the very right side. And I'm doing research in genetic toxicology. So basically looking at how our environment shapes our DNA, especially with a focus on cancer and disease. Now, to link back to the previous talks, this is a small infographic that I found online summarizing the evolutionary thesis of Harari. Just in some short words, that we started off as hunter-gatherers with very simple religions, and then mainly based on our technological progresses and the agricultural revolution, not only we, but also our religions develop, and in his theories also continue to develop until eventually we receive or we become a god-like human with a religion that he calls techno-humanism, which is a data religion that Jean-David talked about. Now I want to go a little bit more into detail of this evolutionary processes, looking at some quotes from his book. So first, Harari says that for close to 4 billion years, every single organism on the planet evolved subject to natural selection, and not even one was designed by an intelligent creator. The giraffe, for example, got its long necks thanks to the competition between archaic groups rather than to the whims of a super intelligent being. He also says that the beauty of Darwin's theory is that it does not need to assume an intelligent designer to explain how giraffes ended up with long necks. So basically, he first abolishes the need for a creator. And just to add up to that picture, also from my genetic point of view, I guess all of you are familiar with the Darwinistic theory. And maybe you're also familiar that even Darwin himself doubted that this theory eventually can explain complex things such as our eye, which is not explainable by a step-by-step mutation in our genome. But the creator at the beginning is not the only thing that he abolishes. He also says in chapter 12 in his book Sapiens, The Law of Religion, our liberal political and juridical systems are founded on the belief that every individual has a sacred inner nature, indivisible and immutable, which gives meaning to the world and which is the source of all ethical and political authority. I think all of us can agree that our systems are based on our innate values that we have. And he also says that this is a reincarnation of the traditional Christian belief in which a free and eternal soul, that resides within each individual. And I would also say that most of us agree with him there. But then continuing for his point that he now wants to again bring the opposite of this current belief, he says that scientists studying the inner working of the human organism have found no soul there. And with this, in my eyes, quite simplified sentence, he also wants to say that there is no such thing as the valuable individual having an innate soul. This is also why I raised the picture on the left, because I'm doubting that the scientists he refers to use the proper tools to find a thing such as a soul. Now, looking in the other direction, the future, he is attacking the personal identity and especially the personal freedom by replacing all of this with scientifically measurable occurrences. He, for example, says that they, the scientists, increasingly argue that human behavior is determined by hormones, genes, synapses, rather than by free will. So everything that can be measured in his eyes is true, everything else which cannot be found is not. He also says that the biologists are right about the past, referring to evolution again, but the proponents of the intelligent design might ironically be right about the future. And he says that because now he says that we, us humans, are the only intelligent creators ourselves. This is why I brought up the picture of this green fluorescent rabbit with the name Alba, because what biologists did there is they put a gene into the genome of a rabbit containing or translating into a fluorescent protein. And then Harari says, well, evolution would never have created such a rabbit, but we did. So here we are, being creators ourselves. He basically then says in the chapter 9, The Great Decoupling, that our belief in individualism are all obsolete. Our current beliefs that we humans are individual and we have a completely free, authentic self, and thus that only we ourselves can eventually know what's good for us, he opposes with his life science statements that all organisms are based on algorithms, which are predictable, and only people really understanding these algorithms, which might eventually just be machines, will know eventually what's best for us. I think especially this last point is quite important because it includes our search for fulfillment, which in my eyes can eventually only be found in God. Or, well, can they? Harari then also wants to say that the new religion promises the exact same reward in chapter 10 of Homo Deus. He says that the high-tech gurus, scientists, are brewing for us brave new religions that have little to do with God and everything to do with technology. They promise all the old prizes: happiness, peace, prosperity, and even eternal life. But here on Earth with the help of technology rather than after death with the help of celestial beings. And I think this is a great link in the end to what also Jean de Witt raised. At the first point, it might seem like, awesome, we can create everything that we need and ever strive for ourselves. But then at a second glance, we realize, well, then all our search for happiness is meaningless. Raising the point of such a philosophy that man eventually would be a useless passion. He also says that we cannot eventually know what's good for us because we don't even understand our minds. He says that we don't know how minds emerge, what their function is, and through trial and error, we learn how to engineer mental states. But we seldom comprehend the full implications of such manipulations. Whereas yet, since we are unfamiliar with the full spectrum of mental states, we don't know what mental aims to set ourselves. And yeah, this already moves pretty much in his pessimistic directions of humans being completely lost, being reliant on, in his eyes, some machine that can do the job of the complicated minds for him. Now, in my last slides, I just want to have a look at Harari's conclusions. And one thing that I realized reading his conclusions is that taking all these arguments that I just brought forward that he used, in my eyes, make total sense. Because first, if he says that we are not understanding our minds and we are completely lost, then it makes sense, for example, that he says, moreover, despite astonishing things that humans are capable of doing, we remain unsure of our goals. Do we seem to be as discontented as ever? How pessimistic is that? And we have advanced from canoes to galleys to steamships to space shuttles. But nobody knows where we are going. So that's already from his afterword in the book Sapiens. That sounds, I guess, very troubling and lost. So just allow me, I felt like putting this quote of the Bible here, which eventually says, do not let your hearts be troubled, trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. And he says, you know the way to the place where I am going. Kind of posting that nobody knows where I'm going. He also said that if we are, what he said previously, eventually then our self-made gods, he says that these self-made gods, with only the laws of physics to keep us company, we are accountable to no one. That's right. We are consequently wreaking havoc on our fellow animals and on the surrounding ecosystem, seeking little more than our own comfort and amusement, yet never finding satisfaction. Is there anything more dangerous than dissatisfied and irresponsible gods who don't know what they want? And I would also say that if we live his dataism, or as he says in Homo Deus, being gods who are just worshipping data, I think this also makes sense. And also one thing that I realized is that, in fact, he's really bound to his perspective of everything has to be explained by data. And one very last thing that I took from his conclusions is that he's basing his belief that nothing has improved so far on the, in science we would call this readout, of how much we managed to decrease the amount of suffering in the world. And as I just said before, he says that we damage our environment and there's as much suffering as there was never before. And three things that I just want to add here is, well, first, just use his own line of argumentation, which is data. He stole this from the book Factfulness, which just shows that so many areas in the last 100 years really, really improved. The other thing is from a review of Bill Gates from his blog, which is a very interesting thought. He says on his blog, so why does it seem as if the world is in decline? Largely because we are much less willing to tolerate misfortune and misery. Even though the amount of violence in the world has greatly decreased, we focus on the number of people who die each year in wars because our outrage at injustice has grown, as it should. This is kind of the same explanation when people ask, why do we have so much cancer incidences today? Well, we also have the best technology that there ever was to just detect cancer. And lastly, I also wanted to add another passage from the gospel. Very truly, I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. I added this because I wanted to question his readout whether it's actually our, or should be our intent to decrease suffering that is maybe important. So my personal conclusions is that Harari wants to bring forward his Homo Deus, which, when it will exist, would make our search for meaning totally without purpose. And that is because humans cannot understand everything and will have to rely on some kind of artificial intelligence. And that basically just promises the loss of self and brings a lot of pessimism. Since I don't want to end my talk with pessimism, I wanted to bring up the additional image of not Homo Deus, but Deus Homo, because by his incarnation coming to our world through a woman, he gives purpose in all the searches for our meanings. And yes, it is true that we humans are quite limited and we will never understand everything fully. But he just invites us to rely because of this on the divine intelligence even more. And in my eyes, this will promise us joy, hope, and love. And with this, I would especially like to thank Antoine for inviting me here to talk and also giving me opportunity to learn also a lot by reading these books, and all of you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nico. We hear the presentation by Richard. Please. Richard is focused. Yes. Okay.
Yep. Hi there. Let me just put it into presentation mode.
Well, perfectly. Yes, you can go.
I can start. All right. 1 sec. There we go. Let's go back. All right. Well, because of this conference, well, first of all, who am I? I'm Richard Prince. I am a researcher of constitutional law and I teach constitutional law at the VU University here in Amsterdam. And because of this conference, I was triggered to read chapter 12 of Sapiens, which I'm going to talk about. Here, Harari talks about liberalism, among others. And I think his remarks are very relevant. He says liberalism is based on Christian beliefs. And in Europe, we obviously have a constant debate on what our values are and what the place of Christianity is, so very relevant. And I think Harari is correct in stating that Christianity is the basis of liberalism. And well, with liberalism, he does not mean simply the political ideology that we have. So in Europe, that means right-wing politics. In the US, left-wing politics. He means with liberalism, human rights, those are the products of liberalism. And these human rights are indeed inseparable from Christianity, which I want to argue or expand on. And he also manifests an important inner contradiction in liberalism, which is also very relevant for today. So first of all, what does Harari say about liberalism? What is it for him? He says that, well, Homo sapiens has a unique and sacred nature according to liberalism and according to all humanism, because he says liberalism is a type of humanism. And that is the standard of morality. And according to liberalism, this uniqueness is found in each and every individual. So that's the differentiation between humanism and liberal humanism. And because of this uniqueness, we should respect the inner voice of each. And that means respecting the liberties of each and consequently also their human rights. And then Harari says that liberalism is indebted to Christianity because he basically says that the idea of this sacred human nature is derived from the Christian belief in the eternal free soul that also was shown in Nico's presentation. I think this is correct. Let me just do one thing here. So I think that indeed the rational soul distinguishes us from other animals. I want to fully explain how Alfred and Timothy have also gone in this direction, have argued this. Liberal ideas built on earlier Christian and pagan philosophers who saw that there's something unique in human nature in that we have a rational soul. And this rational soul transcends the material world, and that is why we can reason and why we are free. Timothy also talked about the fact that there's something special about human beings in the fact that we can have language with complex concepts which go beyond the material world. And well, for Christians, in fact, the soul is directly created by God, even if we adhere to the theory of evolution. So that is, well, I agree with the idea of Harari that this idea that we have a rational soul is linked to Christianity. Now, to honor human dignity is a moral obligation, and that can only be proven, or that is only true if you believe in a higher authority such as a God. So why is to honor a person who has an immaterial soul a moral obligation? Well, the only ultimate source of moral obligations can be a higher reasonable being who both made us and put moral goals in us, and who also wills us to act according to the way we are made. Without an external authority such as God, there is no strict obligation. So there has to be some form of a higher reasonable being that has a will that both endows us with this immaterial soul and sets moral objectives for us. Because from a purely materialistic point of view, so if you exclude an immaterial world where you find God and the soul, from a materialistic point of view, we just cannot explain or give a solid basis for why we have a moral obligation to honor human rights, and also we cannot find a solid basis for why human beings have this special dignity which is inviolable. If you have a purely materialistic worldview, you might think that human rights are very convenient and we should have them, but they cannot be moral obligations. So I agree with Harari's statement that the liberal idea of an objective moral order and human rights derive from a Christian belief in the eternal soul. Now, the second point I wanted to make is this contradiction is in liberalism. So we find this contradiction in the text of Harari, and it revolves around the question why human nature is so special. Why should we always respect the inner voice of a human being that he talks about? And so what does he say exactly? Where do we find this contradiction in his text? So on the one hand, he says that liberalism, the basis of liberalism, is the belief in God and the immaterial soul that he created. But on the other hand, then you see that in the second quote, human beings are posited as the supreme good for liberalism, or some forms of liberalism, and the measure of all meaning. So that contradicts the first statement because it implies there's nothing above humans, such as God. And this contradiction is very present in society and has important consequences for how we deal with human rights. So I'm going to go on to the next slide here. All right. You might say that there are two types of liberalism: liberal transcendentalism and autonomy liberalism. Both are liberal in the sense that they defend human dignity and freedom and human rights. But liberal transcendentalism does not fall in this contradiction, whereas autonomy liberalism does. Now, liberal transcendentalism is a term I came up with to describe those people that defend human dignity and human rights on the basis of an objective morality, ultimately founded on God. In this view, we have an immaterial soul that transcends matter, as I just explained. And according to Harari, liberals want to defend the freedom of the person to listen to their inner voice. He uses the word inner voice. And in this transcendental view of liberal transcendentalism, that inner voice would be our conscience, through which we can connect, quote unquote, to the law of God. And those are binding on us, or that is binding on us, the law of God. So personal freedom and indeed human nature are then not the highest goods, because freedom is good and important because it allows us to listen to this higher order, which is God and his laws. So human nature derives its dignity from this higher order. But there are also liberals who make humans and their freedom itself the absolute value and posit freedom itself as the absolute law. So here the inner voice is nothing other than the expression of our nature, which is mostly shown in our freedom, without reference to something higher. And this form of liberalism I call autonomy liberalism, because personal freedom or autonomy is the most important value. So Harari, in describing liberalism, seems to think mostly of autonomy liberals. We see that Harari thinks of autonomy liberalism when he says that human nature determines the meaning of everything that happens in the universe. The supreme good is the good of Homo sapiens. So if human nature itself, not its origin or its connection to higher being, but human nature itself is the measure of everything, then there's nothing that transcends us. Our freedom has no higher goal and becomes the highest value itself. And this liberalism is a natural product of our no longer believing in God, because if there's no God and nothing above us, well, then we are indeed the highest value. If nothing transcends us, that means that there's no longer an explanation for why we have this immaterial soul, why it is so unique. And also, we no longer have a source of moral obligation. Therefore, I put the image of the monkey in the previous slide as a representative of this form of liberalism, because if there's no higher order, humans are only products of evolution, therefore advanced monkeys. We can therefore no longer explain why human rights should be respected. Whereas, as Harari points out, our society, and specifically our democracy and legal system, are based on respect for human rights. All right, so what does that matter? I think it matters a lot as a lawyer. If our foundation of our ideals of human rights are not clear, then the ideal itself starts to crumble. And you can see that, for example, in the fact that human embryos and feti are no longer inviolable. And also elderly people that no longer want to live can be assisted in ending their lives. This is done in the name of freedom. But the basis of our respect of freedom was our belief in the sanctity of human nature. So are you violating human nature in the name of freedom? And if human nature is no longer holy, what will happen to freedom? Now, autonomy liberals might shrug at these examples because they see nothing wrong in euthanasia or abortion or embryo research. Yet, they should recognize the danger this poses for freedom itself. I thought of the image of the Jenga tower. So if you start pulling away at the foundations of a tower, of our building of human rights, so if you say that human nature is no longer inviolable, then, you know, for a while it might continue to stand, that tower, but after a while, as you see in the game of Jenga, sooner or later the tower will fall over. Now, finally, I think the fact that we can no longer explain the moral foundations of society also makes it harder for us to put up with people with different opinions. And that is very dangerous for democracy. I myself am researching an education law in the Netherlands, which in the name of human rights might forbid religious schools to state their views on homosexuality. So here freedom to express your opinion is taken away. And perhaps this is because we are no longer comfortable with people who do not agree with absolute personal autonomy in sexual matters, because we cannot really explain why we should have personal freedom in the first place. There's an idea or an argument that Leo Strauss makes in this book. So, to conclude, I think Harari unveils a major inconsistency in modern society, and that inconsistency has dangerous consequences. But we don't have to have this Jenga tower that's falling over. We can return to liberal transcendentalism. So the idea that, there is an objective moral framework based on higher values, on an immaterial world, based on God, eventually, ultimately. And that gives a solid foundation of human rights and other liberal values. But the price is, of course, that we have to recognize that freedom is not absolute. So that is my talk.
Richard, thank you very much. You can see that we have here, we are feeling that we are lacking a philosophy of the human person, a consistent philosophy of the human person. I give now the floor to someone who is working on this subject, Dan van Schalsvik. Please, Dan.
Thank you very much, Antoine. It's very nice. Thank you for this opportunity to share some thoughts with you. It's a real joy to be back, even though it's just virtual this year, of course. Antoine, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this book here called Freedom in Quarantine, which indeed is a philosophy of the human person. The very nice cover was actually designed by Richard Prince, who just spoke to us. So next to being a thinker, he's also graphically very talented. And Antoine asked me to introduce my group to you. Well, recently I've been working at home mainly, I think like most of us. So this is the Leidenhoven College squad, wishing you a very happy new year. And so I work at Amsterdam University College, but this philosophical work I do mostly in collaboration with the University of Navarre. And here you see Juan Fernando Seyes and José Ignacio Murillo. Murillo is my philosophy tutor. They're both disciples of Leonardo Polo, who I'm going to talk about today a bit further. So Nico just said something about what Harari and Jesus Christ mean for our hope. And Richard said something about the lack of fundaments of autonomy liberalism. I would like to complement their thought by some brief considerations taken from Spanish philosopher Leonardo Polo. I also spoke of him last year a little bit. Now, I have only 5 minutes, so I'll keep it very brief. Polo explains the difference between philosophical thought and mythical thought. Now, in mythical thought, the most fundamental thing is a sequence of events. So first you have this one god that does this, and then this other god reacts, and then this results, and so forth. So everything is in myths, everything is explained as a sequence of events. Polo says that philosophy is really different in the sense that it discovers the timeless. There are some truths about us, about the world around us, that always remain the same. And you can say that natural science has a somewhat ambivalent relationship to this distinction. So on the one hand, we discover some unchangeable truths like the speed of light, which seems, so it doesn't change. So that seems kind of philosophical in the way Polo means it. On the other hand, the materialist origin story is very much a sequence of events, and what Polo would call a myth-like explanation. That is not to say that there's nothing to like about it, because it's myth-like. It contains valuable elements, but it's very much an in-time explanation. So one event after the other, and not like a stable fundament as philosophy would have it. Now, Harari's book is a good example of such a mythical explanation. And this is also why he writes a history book. His whole book is a history of the humankind, which has like these different steps of development, right? And it's all about this things just happening in time. However, as Richard pointed out, human morality needs a timeless foundation, or we fall into contradictions. And in the line of Nico, we see that as a person, we have a desire for higher hopes than Harari can give us. And I think that classical philosophy and Christian philosophy can help us enrich our view of the human being and supplement those places where Harari's modern philosophy fails, and therefore also correct him in important ways, even though recognizing that there are he does make some interesting points. Now, Polo has written a very nice work that synthesizes the core, or the root, as he calls it, lo radical in Spanish, of the modern classical and Christian view of the human being, and also brings them together. Really, it's like a discussion in which the strong points of each come out. And this text is called Lo Radical y la Libertad, and which I translate as Root and Freedom. I've translated into English with the help of some people, and written a rather extensive introduction to it, so that's also accessible for people who don't have a lot of philosophical background. And this has been published under the title Freedom in Quarantine, that I showed to you a bit earlier. Now, because this is a book of philosophy and not myth, it's not a history, but rather goes directly to the core of what it means to be human, and what consequences that has for many aspects of our thinking. Now, if you are interested in these questions, I would humbly recommend that you get a group of friends together and discuss this group in a reading club, because Polo is really inspiring, and I think you'll get a lot from it. Now, if you want to make it even more juicy, on the 8th of January, a novel is coming out, which explains Polo's insight through a story. It's called Win, Win, Win. And of course, you could also include that in the reading club if you like. Win, Win, Win has many angles to read it. It's a book on collaboration. It's also a book on economics and love. But it's also really a book on philosophical anthropology, and directly links, Freedom in Quarantine also directly links to this story. So it's kind of like an educational project to bring these together, you could say. All right, so with this, I'll end the presentation with one of the most encouraging photos I received last year, which is the following. Father Dancho with 2 copies of Freedom in Quarantine. So if you're in Netherhall, you can already start reading. And for those of you who are interested, I'll post 2 links to the books in the chat. So that was it. And I thank you for your attention, and thanks a lot for the organizers for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Dan, for this very good summary of this first part of the meeting. Now we start the general discussion, and here I have already a lot of messages of people participants wanting to speak. First of all, I give the floor to Massimiliano Berti, to Professor Berti. Please, Massimiliano.
Hello, thanks a lot. First of all, thanks very much to all the contribution. I will be brief. I've never read the books by Harari and Dunbar, but was a bit surprised that also today it was mentioned only once a word which, in my opinion, is fundamental also to have a fruitful investigation concerning origin of religion, which is the word love. It appeared only once, and in our experience, it is the fundamental word in family, who I am, filiation, paternity, friendship. So all in a personal experience we have, and indeed, and also to understand properly what is the some of the answers. So, for example, what does it mean, covenant, forgiveness? So the word love, I think, should be investigated more. And by the way, if one has to summarize the revelation of Christianity, God is love, 3 words are sufficient. So it was just a suggestion to study more these relations to understand more religion. So if we can have a high tech to have a God, love, as Harari suggested, and so that could be an interesting direction of study.
Very good. Thank you very much, Massimiliano. I think you are completely right. This is the issue of love is central, also for explaining what it means to be in the image of God, I think. So now I give the floor to Jan David. He wanted to comment something to Ilias, then Louis, and then Odris Narbutas. Please, you can prepare yourself. Now, Jan David.
Okay, yes, thank you. Sorry, I put the video. Yeah. No, I had a question to Ilias. Ilias, you have told that computer can speak. It's something new. But what is interesting for me is that computers don't want to be happy, but humans do. Could you say something about that? For me, it's a fundamental question. Elias, do you hear me?
Oh, yes, I hear you very well. Good morning, good afternoon. Yeah, well, this is obviously a discussion that has a deep and very rich history. And I would just say briefly 2 points. My original comment was not because I'm advocating that a computer that can understand conversations rather than individual words. I'm not advocating that because of that, it may also be able to generate feelings. This is not my position. My position is fundamentally that we are not computers and computers are not human. So in this respect, I'm very much in your camp. The reason I raise the issue, however, is that there's another gentleman on this call who is an expert on this, Jack Valero. When we are looking at debating, discussing, or trying to understand the kind of philosophy that Homo Deus and books such as that have been advocating, then we very quickly slip into a debate where the format and the formalism of that debate is controlled, or not, I shouldn't say controlled, but is governed. And we must be, I think, very careful not to fall into the trap of talking about language. So this Jamesian influence on this debate very much focuses around language. And if we do that, therefore, one of the dangers is that in a very short period of time, as I've said, my personal opinion is less than 5 years, computers will be able to convince us that not only do they understand us, but that they are happy, they are sad, there are jokes, there is serious debate. So once we think that machines think that, then we collapse that argument. This was my point. But it's a big debate, a very big debate. And on this occasion, I'm afraid, impossible to elaborate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ilias. Please, Louis wanted to comment. Louis?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly. You can go.
No, I only wanted to encourage Dan to make a work on this book, Freedom in Quarantine, because it's a very good complement, a very good approach to complement what we have already heard today. It was only this. I wanted to say to him it was a great thing and he has to do further this work.
Thank you very much.
Okay, then please now, Odris, Ulrich,
Hello, can you
please.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Indeed, I have two
Then
questions.
see you. We then see you. Can you?
Yeah, I will.
Yes, now.
I think now you can see me.
Yes.
Okay. So I have indeed few questions. One.
Where are you? Where are you, please? Where are you?
Okay, I am from Lithuania, and I am first year PhD student of political sciences. And it was really interesting to see how this whole topic is related to my field of studies, because we heard ideas about dignity of human, we heard ideas about liberalism, and indeed I have two questions. First is directly related to book Sapiens. I think that a core element of this book is coincidence, because when Harari tried to define revolution, how we became very intellectual and so on, he compared us with machines and so on. He tried to talk about coincidence, but in fact, I didn't find any evidence which can demonstrate that it is not a plan of God, but it is just coincidence. And my question is for all speakers, how we can separate coincidence and a plan? Because when we are talking about anything, we are trying to find definition, we have try to find some elements which demonstrate that, okay, this is coincidence. And at Harari, there is a very strong claim with lack of evidence. And another question is about meaning and purpose and political consequences of a lack of a meaning and purpose. Because, okay, we saw that liberalism tried to say that we have soul, we are created according to the image of God, and that's the reason why we are free, and we have to protect the freedom. Okay, if we deny that our roots, if we deny and we can find the purpose for our meaning, it looks very Hobbesian idea indeed. And my question is, maybe Harari is another gate for Hobbesian ideas, which can come back to our society, and now sovereign can be data and machines and so on. So which are like much more intelligent, we can collect more data and all those things. So two questions about coincidence and about Harari as a gate to the Hobbesian ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrich. I think Gennaro Luis could be a good person to answer these questions. Gennaro, you can reflect a bit, and meanwhile, I give the floor to Gregard Hall. Gregard Hall has posted here a long comment in the chat. Who is Gregard Hall? I know Gregard, but who is behind the chat, behind the message?
It's me, Antoine. It's Father James.
Oh, excellent, Father James. Please, then, you want to communicate something important to everyone?
Just to say that, I mean, what I say on the message really, but nothing more really, that this recent Ratzinger Prize winner, Jean-Luc Marion, this is comment on the whole, the question of love is what, who was it who said that? I can't remember. Was it, who was, I can't remember which one of you said it. One of you said, about, love being the key thing, not having been mentioned. Well, that's precisely a discussion which Marion raises. His book, I found it very hard to understand, a lot of it, but very much he discussed, that love is the way to know God, and what's more important, God is love or God is being. So that's just a discussion. Can I just a tiny thing on the thing of coincidence? I would have thought coincidence is surely simply the unexplained, is it? It makes me think of that lovely quote from the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who said that this lovely idea is when I pray, coincidences happen.
Sam has raised Sam, please.
That was a previous question, but I still like to ask it if possible. I'll post it in chat too, maybe. So it was a question to Nikolai Pullen, and he talks about direction. And maybe I'll just read it out what I wrote down, because I found this, at least to me, a not satisfying answer, as in the idea of trusting God. I'll just read it out and then maybe he can respond. So I do not know if trusting God helps, at least me, in providing direction. It feels still there's no meaning to existence in that sense. It makes me wonder why an almighty entity creates anything, as he almost by definition seems requires nothing. An almighty and God lacks any limitation, as such, has nothing to overcome, no goals, nothing external to himself. And so consequently, it seems to me that he creates anything. It serves no purpose. So we might talk about having a purpose within our existence, but then the meaningless of existence as a whole still seems to be a real problem. We've only moved the problem back. So we go from there is no goal in life to there is a goal in life, but this is arbitrary and utterly meaningless, as God could have done without us. So I do not think this existential angst that some people might have is necessarily solved by this goal or purpose provided by an entity if this purpose still feels arbitrary. But I'm inclined to hear responses to that.
Well, Nikolai?
Yes?
Do you want to answer?
Well, I can give it a try, of course. Well, or I can say I don't think I have the answer. But I can just bring forward some thoughts that came to me. So many people usually speak about finding purpose or searching for purpose. And in my eyes, there's no such thing as finding or searching purpose, but only creating purpose. So I would say that God, being the ultimate creator, created us in his image and also giving us the ability to create. Thus, what I want to say is that we ourselves can create meaning and can give purpose to our life. However we do that remains, that what I wanted to bring forward with my presentation, and that we can only do this if we have an individual soul, of course, because otherwise this argumentation would completely crumble. And I think what your question was also basing on is that if I argue that the purpose in life is always seeking or finding God, then this might sound arbitrary because it's based initially on the assumption that there is a God. But this again relates then back to we ourselves create our meaning, and also we ourselves have the freedom to say, well, I believe in a God, so I create this meaning, so to speak. I hope that was not confusing.
I see Alfred want to add something, and then Gennaro. Please, Alfred.
Yes, I would like to add not the last comment, but before there was the question of coincidence and plan, purpose. But I would say that the scientist, he cannot see a plan. For example, the idea of intelligent design, you cannot solve by science. There's philosophy who is doing that job, because looking what's behind that, and you're going from the realm of science to the realm of philosophy. And therefore, I think it's very important when we have these kind of discussions that also from both parts there should be contributions. Philosophy, from the one side, who can say there's a purpose, there's a plan involved, and the scientist who can only study the facts, the natural facts, but cannot make comments about it. He only can say it's not probabilistic that it came such a way, but not much more. That's just my comment.
Thank you, Alfred. Gennaro, please, you want to add something?
Yes, just briefly, because the subject of meaning and purposiveness, or in general teleology, is very complex. Also for philosophy, for a philosopher definition, from a philosophical point of view. The only thing I would like to say is that just one historical reference from the point of view of Aristotle, the final cause in general movement is something that reflects an intellectual observation upon the world. So from its origin, the definition of a teleological, of a finalistic movement in nature is an intellectual deal, an intellectual achievement. So from the origin, the intellect, the nous, as Aristotle says, and the telos are related. And in general, I think that the second thing that I would like to say is that in general, the idea of purpose is conceived as an architectural concept, as something that solves the problem of the dynamic of the whole universe, of the whole organism or living being problem, the problem of the movement. What is the goal, which is the purpose of the movement? But instead, I think that that is indeed, I think that the best use of the idea of purpose is to see it from a static, not dynamic point of view, as using the purposiveness as a metaphysical concept and not as a scientific concept, because the metaphysical concept of purposiveness or teleology is that a being remains as the possibility of orient his movement to remain in the being, to stay as longer as it can in the being. So the useful idea of purposive is not only something that organizes a movement, but that's something that maintains a movement in its static position. That's my suggestion. But this is something that I must think about. Okay.
Thank you. Anna Pearson, please. You have here sent a comment regarding Sam. Could you please elaborate on this, Anna?
Hello.
Hello.
I'm based in England, and I work for Cambridge Quantum Computing in the quantum natural language processing side of things. I didn't really have much to add apart from that all I think as everyone has, we all think about the meaning and purpose of life, and I find that verse in Acts very comforting, that God created us because he wants to be found. He wants us to seek him and find him, and I can find that great help. I don't know if it helps Sam, but yeah, well, that's all I wanted to say.
May I respond quickly? Is that okay?
You can find this in the chat. Yeah. Okay. And then we have to a last comment by Richard, please.
Sure. I just wanted to respond quickly to Audris. And I wanted to say, first of all, that Harari does not say himself that human nature is the highest value, but he interprets what liberals think. So just to defend Harari there, I don't think he takes a very clear position himself. And then the second thing, whether we're going towards this Hobbesian world, well, as I said, this comment that if we no longer have a basis for why we believe in freedom, then it becomes hard to listen to other people, which might indeed lead to this kind of Hobbesian world where the government enforces personal autonomy on people. That idea, I took it from a book by Leo Strauss, which I've read here, and also want to make a little advertisement. I think he's one of the most important 20th century conservative political philosophers. So if you haven't read it, as a political philosopher, political science PhD student, I would do it. It's called Natural Right and History. And he talks about what happens when we no longer have this natural law basis of our morality, and also what that meant for the history of philosophy. And then he also discusses Hobbes. So if you're interested in that, I would definitely read that book. So that's just, that's what I wanted to say.
Well, thank you. It is time for the concluding remarks. Let us see. After these covenants of between God and humanity referred to in Genesis, the covenant with Adam and Eve and the covenant with Noah at the end of the flood. This answer requires an answer. This question requires an answer. Are animistic Homo sapiens creatures human beings in the image of God? My guess is, and I think your guess is also yes. No, but the other question and the challenge, I think this is the real challenge by the explanations of Dunbar and Harari, is this one. Before these covenants, were animistic Homo sapiens creatures human beings in the image of God? This, I invite you to reflect about this as preparation for the coming meeting, for the follow-up of this meeting. My guess to this, but is my guess, I could comment on this, but it is only a guess of mine, is no. Now, the other important question raised by Harari is of the humankind in the image of God, as it is now, we will disappear and become replaced by new species Homo Deus. Again, my guess to this answer is no, unless we deconstruct humankind. And in a sense, this is what I think Harari has the merit of presenting this the construction process which is going on, and in a sense he is ambiguous in this sense that it looks like he is also promoting or supporting this the construction process. The important point is that he thinks that techno-humanism, you see here, actually the motivation is the same motivation Hitler and his ilk had, but by other means. But if this is the motivation for this techno-humanism and data religion we are now, which is now developing, then this amounts to deconstruct humanity and humankind, in my view. So that this is the big challenge we have to face in the coming years. An important quotation by Dunbar in a talk at the Faraday Institute some weeks ago is really interesting and amazing. He says, something odd about religions is that they work in a way that purely secular ideologies don't. These have a very short lifespan. You could argue that the Nazis were a form of religion and had all the trappings of religion, songs, philosophy, theologies, rituals, but it didn't last. And likewise, communism and the environmental movements, there is something missing from them that makes religions work. Historically, you can see this in the coming back of people to religion in Russia after long attempts to suppress it. And you see much of the same thing in China after equally long attempts to suppress religion. Whether you regard it a good thing or a bad thing, it works. And it works also to keep society functioning and to keep even the evolution of humanity and of humankind. What makes religions work? I could say, in view of what we have discussed here, is the hope that we can reach bliss, immortality, and divinity. These are words by Harari. We have this hope, the hope for eternal happiness, and the hope also for God-likeness. This is a hope we have, and actually is the hope to reach love, using the comment by Massimiliano. Immortality, now we could say, can we reach immortality, happiness, and God-likeness without the deconstruction of humankind? My answer is yes. We can reach immortality, happiness, and God-likeness without the deconstruction of humankind, because God, the Word, became flesh to make humankind in the image of God. So I think if we want to keep to humankind, and if we want to consider that humankind has a special dignity and worth, then the solution is not Homo Deus, but to complete Homo Deus with Deus Homo, as Nico also proposed. So we have to give to Deus Homo Deus. Through Deus Homo can humans become Homo Deus. And that is the end of this meeting. Thank a lot to all the speakers, to all participants that you have for your comments. And as said, we have to continue this exciting reflection. We will organize a follow-up meeting. So any questions, any comments, send them to us, and in order we can prepare the coming meeting. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Antoine.
Thank you. Have a nice time.
Do we know when the next meeting will be already, Antoine?
Thank you.
No, we are thinking you can. We have to see the dates. Yes, but I will say in 2 months about. So, Mark, welcome.
The next meeting in Netherhall, you're thinking Netherhall?
No. Well, the next meeting online for the moment. The next meeting in Netherhall, I hope that if Corona allows, then we will keep it in January 22, possibly with Robin Dunbar. Okay. So have a happy New Year and a good meal.
Great. Okay. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye.